Hey there, Kyle Souza here, going to talk about Star Wars Episode 1. Doing a little series. You can check out the Talking Geeks YouTube channel or thetalkinggeek.com for the full blog posts with all these videos. We start with Episode 4, A New Hope, move to Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, where we learn that Luke is Vader's father. These videos are not recaps, reviews, or critiques. They pull out specific plot points. I'm talking about how they tie together, how it affects the overall storyline, what some of these implications are in light of all 6 films, the new films coming out with The Force Awakens soon, and then also the TV shows being Rebels and the Clone Wars TV show. So, and then also the non-cinematic media being the books and comics. So again, not reviews, not recaps, not critiques, specific plot points on how these things tie together. Moving to Episode 1, then we'll do 2, 3, back to 6 with Return of the Jedi, and The Force Awakens comes out. So, let's jump right into The Phantom Menace, Episode 1. This movie, keep in mind who its target audience was. It gets a lot of flack for being the worst of the Star Wars films. It is not my favorite. It is very different, very high expectations for this film. It had been so long since we had a new Star Wars film. It was so exciting for people to see, hey, we're going to get to see Anakin growing up, that turn into Darth Vader. We're going to see what Obi-Wan was like before his brief stint in A New Hope. We're going to get to see all these things that helped create or form the storyline in this universe that we love so much. Now, the people with these hopes and dreams were the people in love with the original trilogy. Now, many of these people had seen it in the late 70s and 80s when they came out, or like myself, saw them later, but were very familiar and in love with the original trilogy. That's not necessarily who the prequel trilogy was aimed at. It was a very early 2000s movie, in that the actors that were picked, the writing that was done, the special effects, the way things were laid out, a very early 2000s film that was targeted at young people, children, teens, young adults even, at that time period. So not necessarily the people that grew up as fans of the original trilogy. This was looking for new fans. Now, again, it's still appealing to fans of the original trilogy in many respects, but some people took it a little bit more personally than others as far as some of the choices that were made. Now, I'm not going to go any more into that detail. Just keep in mind when this movie was made, who it was made for, and why it was made when, being critical of it. It not necessarily is supposed to be compared to the original trilogy in that manner. Though there are many similarities, mirroring kind of a dance in between the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy, with several similarities that are done on purpose. All right. So, right in the opening crawl of The Phantom Menace, we see that this is about taxes. The Trade Federation is fed up about taxation on their routes. They have held hostage the system of Naboo. Why Naboo? It was not an economic powerhouse. It was not a political powerhouse. Its people were divided. We had the humans and the Gungans. It is not a system central in the Republic geographically. It's kind of out there, which made it easier for the Trade Federation to set up their blockade. So what's the importance here? The importance is Sheev Palpatine. Senator Palpatine becomes Chancellor Palpatine, becomes Emperor Palpatine. Palpatine is also Darth Sidious, he's the Sith Lord. So Palpatine is what's important. He's from Naboo. He's starting with a planet that he's familiar with, a people that he's familiar with. While he does have the ability to see the future quite well, that's very much talked about in the series, he is also relying on his knowledge of the system, because the future is always in motion. We even see that in this film, that there are things that he doesn't always anticipate, but he is also a mastermind at orchestrating these things. So Palpatine is the reason Naboo gets picked. He's the one orchestrating this, and he's starting with his home planet, place that he's familiar with, and a place that is out of the way. So it will be easier to roll this out as kind of a testing ground for the whole separatist war. All right. One thing that I will be critical of, though, that Jedi super speed bit, when Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon get out of the room with the poisonous gas, they fight some droids and then they speed off really fast. That one I don't have an explanation for. I wish it wasn't there, but no explanation. Just the way it is, though. This is all official. We do need to accept it as being something that happened, as far as Star Wars is concerned. Okay. Next, we do get introduced to Jar Jar Binks pretty early on. Now, there is a pretty cool fan theory out there about Jar Jar Binks being a Sith Lord. I don't adhere to that. I don't think that's the case. There are several reasons why. I believe that he is in the movie, as far as from a movie development point, for a comedic relief character. As far as the storyline is concerned, he is a pivotal character, and that many things that happen because of him. And but he is a bit clumsy. He is oafish. I don't think that he is a mastermind. I don't think he's working with Darth Sidious. I don't think that he's a Sith Lord. I'll touch on that again in a little bit. But that is a fun theory. It doesn't hold any water, and it's not official storyline either. You know, there are lots of cool theories out there, but until it gets penned and stamped by the approval of Lucasfilm as official canon, then it's just a fun theory. But this theory has already been addressed by the writers, by the media, that is the Star Wars franchise, and it's just not true. But it is fun to think about, so not gonna be harsh on it. All right. We do also see a droid that looks like R2-D2. We are introduced to R2-D2. We see other droids that look like him, including one blue one. We've seen other droids that look like him. These ones much more so. We see that they're the property of the Naboo government. He's on this starship. R2-D2 is an old dude. He's been around a while. So that also plays a role in Empire Strikes Back, when the jets don't go off, or he doesn't use the jets to get off the X-Wing when he's in the Dagobah Swamp. We could excuse that in retrospect, as, hey, he's old, maybe those parts don't work. Alright. We then get introduced to Anakin, being very young, younger than Padme. It is only a few years difference, but we are introduced to them, and Anakin uses what is either the best or the worst pickup line with, "Are you an angel?" Many people write that off as corny and whatnot, but keep in mind, it worked. He got the girl, eventually. I mean, it took a few other things, but, it at least, didn't take him out of the runnings. Alright, but we do see that Anakin is a very emotional character. He is a very passionate character. He hates slavery. He's very idealistic. He has good intentions. He wants to help these people that he just met. He wants to do things for other people. He wants to be freed and then come back and free the other slaves. He does come back to Tatooine not as an emancipator, but to slaughter some people. That's a different story, though. So he does start out, at least, very idealistic. I'm not going to say pure, because he does have a lot of anger in him, but he does have good intentions. But we have a saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So for him, the road to the dark side is paved with those same good intentions. We also see that Anakin is very talented when it comes to mechanical engineering, those types of things, because not only is he a good pilot, that's aided by the Force abilities, but also he built C-3PO. So C-3PO is also old. Not necessarily as old as R2-D2, because R2 was in commission beforehand, but C-3PO is being built by young Anakin to help his mom out around the house. She may not need a translator, but he's picking up spare parts from other droids. That's why C-3PO looks like such a standard model, even though he was custom built, because this boy is using spare parts from standard models that he comes across, and he's building something that with arms, legs, and communication abilities to work with his mom around the house and whatnot with her duties. We do see early on also that Anakin is recognized as being Force sensitive by Qui-Gon. Now, a lot of people like to point to Qui-Gon as a gray Jedi. that being a EU term for someone who's not evil, but not necessarily following the code of conduct for the Jedi Order. I don't think that's the case either. He does have some points of contention with the Jedi Council, but he is not in rebellion against them, and he's not a secret Sith either. I've seen that online. The case is just that he's got some points of contention with the Council, but he is a very strong Jedi and one that they value. They send on this important mission. He has been on other important missions. He does have a Padawan. He is able to teach others. They trust him with that. So we do see that he is important. He is powerful. And he does recognize the importance of Anakin. He believes that Anakin is there to fulfill the prophecy. The prophecy being that we'll be born to bring balance to the Force. That'll be covered in the next video, just a separate video about Anakin bringing balance to the Force. Whether or not that happened, and if so, how, that type of thing. But Qui-Gon does say, there's something about this boy. Anakin is the only human who can do the pod races because of his Force abilities to foresee things into the future. He can react quicker than other people because he sees them before they actually happen, so he's ready. And then also his mother saying that there is no father, that it was basically a virgin birth, parallels to our Jesus story, and Anakin being that Jesus archetype. All right, and there are also other virgin birth stories, but being a Christian myself, I always like to point to the Bible. All right, we are also introduced to MIdi-Chlorians, and we don't know what necessarily a normal count is for non-Force users, but he has a count of over 20,000, which is greater than Yoda, and the MIdi-Chlorians a lot of people didn't like because it gave a scientific explanation for what was essentially magic. Being how we're introduced to the Force in the original trilogy, that it binds all living things together. Life creates it, that life, that it is involved with life, very closely tied, and then it allows living things to interact with each other, and it is a part of living things, and that people with this Force sensitivity can both control it and be controlled by it. It's a different kind of power to tap into. Here we're giving a scientific explanation, which I personally don't find offensive. Magic is science we don't understand yet, is a phrase that I've heard that I like. And so with this, we do get introduced to the MIdi-Chlorians as a scientific explanation for the Force. All right, and then we also have one thing that I like to address are, why are ships so different? It's only been 30 years. When we're looking from episode 6 to episode 7, that's about 30 years, and this is roughly 30 years, not exactly, from The Phantom Menace to A New Hope. So, but going from Return of the Jedi to The Force Awakens, we're still seeing X-Wings. We're seeing basically the same Rebel flight suit. The Millennium Falcon's still in service. Several of the same droids are still in service. Looking at just how we know how time works, 30 years... there's cars that are 30 years old still driving on the road just fine. What is it that ships in particular and weapons and things are so different during the Phantom Menace versus Episode 4? So two big reasons. One is that different production team and different technology, we could do different special effects and they look cool. But two, and a Star Wars universe answer, is that it's a different part of the galaxy. We're seeing a part of the Republic. Tatooine wasn't part of the Republic. It's very much out there. It is barely controlled by the Empire in that they have a presence, but the Hutts, gangsters, crime still runs rampant. People hide out there, smugglers. Obi-Wan Kenobi recognized that, if you don't want to be found, it's a good place to be. So with that in mind, we see that this is a kind of a more civilized situation where we see ships and weapons and things from Naboo and on Coruscant. That's a very different geographic reason for these things than just, new special effects. All right. We do get introduced to Jabba, so we see that he's around. He's been in power for a while. He is well known, and it also ties us back to that original trilogy. We get introduced to Jabba in Episode 6 originally. Well, here we see him chronologically first. He does also make appearances in the Clone Wars TV show, so that's also cool too, just to tie it all together. not everybody has the same lifespan, and also it is important to remember that this is one single cohesive universe. There will be people that bridge the gaps in between the different trilogies, just like we had people bridging World War One to World War Two, though that wasn't as big of a gap as these trilogies had. But we do see that, you know, it's easy for important people to play important roles in more than one important event. All right. The pod race was cool. A lot of people liked that. Some people didn't. For me, the best thing about the pod race is the arcade game that came afterwards. You got to sit in there. You got to do the racing. So that was pretty cool. That was my favorite part of the pod race, was the arcade game that we got after the movie was released. And then we do see some similarities in between the pod race and the Death Star attack. Now, there is a more analogous event later in this movie, but we do see people getting taken out, similar to how they were taken out in the attack on the Death Star. We're seeing pod racers being taken out by Sebulba, Tusken Raiders, different things, kind of giving Anakin a more clear shot, as it were, at winning, just like Luke had a more clear shot. All right, we get introduced to Chancellor Valorum and then Senator Palpatine at this point. And again, Palpatine is orchestrating a takeover of the Senate. He does get control, and he does become emperor. And they even reference the Senate in A New Hope. You may recall when the Imperial officers are talking about it, and Tarkin says that the Senate has been disbanded, the last vestige of the Old Republic. So this is an important part of the governing body, and that's one thing that's prominent in all these films. And who is the government? You know, this one started with taxes, very governmental, but also the Empire was a large governing body, not just a military force bent on evil. We have that same thing here. This bureaucracy, this Senate, is the governing body for the galaxy. And Palpatine sees this as his way to take over. We'll talk more about that in later films when we get some really awesome quotes about that too. Palpatine sees the Senate as not what it used to be. It is corrupt. It is full of bureaucracy. Now this is also him bending Padme, or Queen Amidala's, ear and wanting to influence her in a certain way. But it also is true. You know, that's one thing that you know, everybody likes to quote Obi-Wan with, "Oh, from a certain point of view," but a lot of times the Sith or the dark side people are telling the truth. You know, Darth Vader did want Luke to join him, and Palpatine is being truthful here too when he says that he wants, or that he sees that the Senate has become corrupted. All right. We also see the Jedi Temple. The Jedi Temple, very cool. A lot of people are like, man, you have all these Jedis right on Coruscant. It's the Jedi Council, these masters. How do they not see Palpatine right there in front of them? Well, we learned from other external media that it was built on a Sith monument. So their vision is clouded. And they mention that several times in the prequel trilogy, actually, that the future is clouded, or this event is clouded. They can't see. We see from the Dark Side Cave on Dagobah. We see in other, it was a big part of the expanded universe, but also part of the written media that is part of the canon, that Sith relics, that they can be imbued not just with the Force, but also the dark side of the Force. And so that can have an effect on people, augmenting their powers, limiting their abilities as well. And so these Jedi are limited based on their location. They built the temple in a bad place. And, you know, I'm not sure exactly why they built it there, but for some reason they did. It was a bad choice, and now it is affecting them, you know, thousands of years later. This is not like, oh, we just built this 20 years ago. No, it's been a long time that it's been there. The people who are on the council now weren't part of that decision necessarily, so it is... it's not something that you can really blame on them for making that decision, but they are unaware of that fact also, and it does play an important role, the fact that their vision is clouded. So again, the prophecy is mentioned. Obi-Wan asks Qui-Gon not to go against the council because Obi-Wan wants to train Anakin. And they're saying he's too old. And we are introduced to how dogmatic the Jedi Order has become. You know, we think of the light side being the Jedi and the dark side being the Sith, but actually there were other good Force users that weren't part of the Jedi Order, and there were other dark side Force users that weren't part of the Sith, like the Night Sisters, or coming up, the Knights of Ren. So there are these other groups, so like the Grey Jedi don't necessarily fall in the middle, they do tend to lean towards the good. But they do not follow the Jedi Order. So a lot of people, and we see this in the Clone Wars TV show, have become upset with how strict and dogmatic and rigid the Jedi Order has become, that it hasn't been just about doing good. It has been about doing certain things a certain way. A lot of people have issues with that with any religion, and you'll remember from A New Hope, Jedi and whatnot is referred to as a religion on more than one occasion. So that is something just for us to make it analogous to. And then, hearkening back to both those points, being the location of the council chambers and also that they didn't want Qui-Gon to train Anakin, is the fact that he was cold. The council does decide to test him. Anakin, they ask him how he feels, he says cold. And they're like, oh, well, you've got fear, you're afraid of your mother dying. And he's like, no, but then Yoda's like, yes, you are. And, but being cold is also endemic of being in the presence of the dark side. Now, is this the dark side welling up in him, like they're thinking? Or is this him feeling the effects of this Sith location that they're on top of inside this Jedi temple? So that's just an interesting thought there. We are introduced also to Bail Antilles in that he is one of the runners against Palpatine for position of Supreme Chancellor. Bail Antilles is from Alderaan. You'll remember Leia is later from Alderaan. She was part of Bail Organa's family. He was her adoptive father. So Bail Antilles is not the same as Bail Organa, but they are related through marriage. Those are two very prominent families, two prominent houses, as it were, on Alderaan. We also see Wedge Antilles being a rebel pilot who survives both Death Star attacks, the events of Episode 5 as well. But that Antilles is not necessarily related to this Antilles in that he's from Corellia and they are Antilles. It is recognized as a common name throughout the Star Wars galaxy, like Skywalker may have been, or certain other names are. So we talked about the Cloud Jedi Vision. What exactly are MIdi-Chlorians? There's something that is inside each cell. A lot of people came to terms with MIdi-Chlorians through the story of Darth Plagueis, who Darth Sidious studied under. But that book isn't canon. It's not official, and until it's made so or something is made to replace it, we can't go off of everything in there, but it is a great read. You should check it out because a lot of those can still be true. Even though that one story or that specific writing is not canon, Darth Plagueis is a canon character. He is mentioned in these prequel trilogies, and MIdi-Chlorians are also canon, and it's a cool read, and many of those facts, I'm sure, will be reused, if not just retconned in. So, back to Jar Jar, and whether or not he is a secret Sith. I think that he's just comedic relief. I think the most convincing sign for me, aside from us never seeing him and Sidious come out and say it, is the attack on Naboo when he's fighting with the Gungans. And so a lot of people also are like, oh, maybe he's the Phantom Menace. You know, who is the Phantom Menace being referenced by the title? We'll talk about that again in a second. So back to Jar Jar. The deal here is that we see when the Gungans are fighting, their shield gets taken down, they start to retreat, he hides underneath a carrier with a bunch of orbs on it. That starts to roll away, he opens that up, a bunch of orbs then roll out and start destroying some of the droid army. just that whole thing reads accident, not well orchestrated planning. And there's specific parts of that where he's running from them or running from the orbs, and he's fighting with the droid army, and the robot getting stuck on his foot and all that stuff. It doesn't scream, or it doesn't, to me at least, read as confident Sith so much as scaredy cat, so who got lucky type thing. And again, that's a plot device for the film. We then do see the space battle, which is very analogous to the Death Star space battle. We have a lone fighter up against a giant space station who gets off a lucky shot, as it were, or a affected shot, since they were both Force attuned. It does also tie together Luke and his father. They were both good pilots. They both used R2. Lot of analogy there. We do see that Anakin can also understand R2. Now, is this because he's been around droids so much? Does he have some sort of affinity for this? Not everyone can understand droids. We do see that Luke learns to understand R2, just like Ezra Bridger is learning to in Rebels while we watch it now. But Anakin, starting off at that point at a much younger age than either of those characters, already able to understand R2-D2. And then we have the Theed Palace fight scene, a lot of people's favorite here, facing off between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and Darth Maul. Again, Jedi super speed would really come in handy there, but not going to complain anymore about that. The fight scene's very cool. It's also reminiscent of just gigantic things like, again, a gigantic Death Star, even though not directly relatable there. We do see a lot of those same color schemes, though. But it was also to show off a lot of what Industrial Light and Magic could do. The space battle, the ground battle, this fight scene, a lot of cool things. We see a very different lightsaber fight than what we saw in the original trilogy. That just has to do with ability and times changing and just things being different. That's one thing that a lot of people like about the prequel trilogy compared to the original trilogy, is how much more intense so many lightsaber fights were. This one included. Very intense. Though, the one from Empire Strikes Back, not bad. Return of the Jedi, not bad. In any way, just saying that this one is different. We do see Qui-Gon in a funeral pyre at the end, since he is killed. Gives no closure there. Also parallels to Obi-Wan dying in A New Hope, where the Master dies. Funeral pyre being a Jedi tradition. And then, Yoda and Mace also talking about how there is a Sith out there. They need to find out who this is. Who is the Phantom Menace? They don't say that, but that's the question being asked. Who is the Phantom Menace? So, is it Darth Sidious? Whenever I first saw the movie as a child, which I saw it 5 or 6 times in theaters, I don't remember which one, that's not exaggerating, really 5 or 6 times. I was thinking 5, my parents thought more. But I thought it was Darth Maul. He was the surprise one. They saw him. They didn't see Sidious. But they do say that there is always two. That harkens back to the rule of 2 from Darth Bane, being that there's a master and an apprentice. Also another reason for Jar Jar not to be a Sith master. That would be 3 of them working together, which not necessarily out of the realm of possibility for that situation to occur. But here I just don't think that it is. And the Sith also is a strict order. Not the same as the Jedi Order, but they do have their own rules also. It's not just, oh, you're either a Jedi or you're a Sith. No, those are specific sects to follow. S-E-C-T-S there. Where was I? Oh yes, who is the Phantom Menace? So then a lot of people, much more mature than I at the time, were like, oh no, it's Darth Sidious. He's the Phantom. He's the one that they can't see. Okay, well, that makes sense. That makes sense, Sidious being the Phantom Menace. But then also something that came to me as a realization later, what if Anakin is the Phantom Menace? Now that's not something that's supported. There is no definitive answer to this in the media yet, but what if Anakin is the Phantom Menace? What if the fact that they're allowing this child that they have doubts about to join the Order, to become a Jedi Master, to play a prominent role in their activities, who is ultimately their demise, what if he is the Phantom that they don't see? So that's just a thought that I had that I thought was pretty cool. Obi-Wan does take Anakin as his Padawan. He does also strike a chord, or bring up a challenge to Yoda, in that he will do so because he promised Qui-Gon that he would, with or without the Council's approval. So we see that Obi-Wan is not necessarily everything by the book. He's willing to ruffle some feathers. And I think that all plays into Anakin and how he becomes who he is. Again, you have Destiny and a whole lot of things playing in there, but just the master that was training him wasn't like Mace Windu or somebody else who was all about the Jedi code. There's someone, Obi-Wan is someone who's willing to bend the rules, and usually generationally, if one person's willing to do that a little bit, the next generation's willing to do that more, and then more, and then more. So we're seeing that with Qui-Gon to Obi-Wan to Anakin. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. Check out the other videos, and check out thetalkinggeek.com. Thank you.